Welcome to my channel. Thank you for watching my videos. Subscribe so you don't miss new videos because what I'm going to tell you today is I was scrolling through Reddit one night, just wasting time as usual, when I stumbled upon a post that caught my attention. It was from a guy talking about his girlfriend, and he was describing her in a way that made me feel like I was reading about someone I knew all too well. He mentioned how she considered herself a cat, how she had some really bizarre behaviors, and how their relationship was, well, difficult. The more I read, the more it sounded like my ex. Seriously, the similarities were uncanny. Even her age matched. I'd been through my fair share of relationships, but this girl, had left a pretty lasting impression. We didn't end on the best of terms, and honestly, I didn't expect to ever hear from her again. But when I read this post, something about it made me pause. It wasn't just the weird cat thing or the strange behaviors he was describing. It was the way he talked about her, as though he was in deep but couldn't see how manipulative and emotionally draining she was. I felt like I was looking back at the past through his words, and it made my stomach twist a bit. Something was telling me it was her. I kept reading the post, and then she said something that made my heart stop for a second. It was a throwaway comment about wanting to quit her job and live full-time like a cat. I swear, that exact phrase hit me like a punch to the gut because the girl I was with, said the exact same thing years ago. The girl who didn't even like cats. It was one of those weird, offhand remarks that stuck with me, and it made me feel like I was stuck in some kind of weird déjà vu. At first, I tried to brush it off. I mean, it's not like this guy's girlfriend is the only one who could ever say something so odd, right? But the more I thought about it, the more everything started aligning. The way she talked, the things she wanted, even the little quirks she had. It all matched. It was too close to ignore. I started to feel a wave of frustration. How could this guy not see what was going on? How could he be so blindsided by her behavior? And yet, part of me understood. I had been there once too. When you're caught up in it, it's hard to see the red flags. So, I did what anyone would do. I messaged the guy, hoping to find out if we lived in the same area. If she was the one I thought she was, I needed to warn him. She wasn't just quirky or a little difficult, she was emotionally aggressive and manipulative. But he never replied. Maybe he never saw my message, or maybe he didn't want to hear it. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was right. This was her. After sending the message and getting no response, I started to spiral. I couldn't help but replay everything in my head, every moment, every argument, every sign I had ignored during our relationship. It's funny how memories can be so vivid when something shakes them loose, and suddenly, I was back in that place, feeling everything again. The shock, the anger, the frustration, and the deep ache of being emotionally manipulated. I remember the first time she showed her true colors. It was subtle at first, small comments that made me question myself, like, you're the only one who doesn't understand me. Or when she would shift blame onto me for things I didn't do, making me feel guilty for just being myself. There was always this weird tension hanging between us. I never really knew if I was loved, hated, or just there for convenience. But what hit hardest was how she could make me feel like I was the problem. She could twist things in such a way that I'd doubt myself completely. Every argument, no matter how small, felt like an attack on my character. It was always my fault. If I tried to stand my ground or show frustration, she'd play the victim, making me feel like the villain for even having feelings. I was so wrapped up in her world that I didn't even see how toxic it was until I walked away. Even then, it took me months to see the full picture. It wasn't love, it was control, manipulation, and emotional exhaustion. As I sat there, thinking back on everything, I couldn't help but feel this strange mixture of anger and sadness. How did I let myself get so caught up in her web? It wasn't just the manipulation, it was the constant emotional roller coaster. One minute, she would be sweet and affectionate, and the next, she would shut down or lash out. There was never any consistency, no solid foundation to build on. It was exhausting trying to keep up with her moods. And it wasn't just her behavior that had me questioning everything. It was how it made me feel. I started doubting myself constantly. I'd second-guess my decisions, my feelings, even my reality. Every little argument would turn into a grand spectacle, and every disagreement would be treated like the end of the world. I realized now that I was always walking on eggshells, afraid to make the wrong move. I never knew what kind of mood she'd be in or what would trigger her next outburst. It was like living in a constant state of emotional whiplash. And the worst part? I didn't even know how to get off the ride. I couldn't help but feel this sickening sense of déjà vu when I read that post. It was like hearing my own story, but through someone else's eyes. The same patterns, the same emotional manipulation, the same toxic cycle. I wanted to reach out to the guy and warn him. I really did. But part of me also knew that no matter how much I tried to help, he would have to experience it for himself before he understood. The longer I thought about it, the more I realized how much I'd learned from that relationship. It wasn't just a painful memory, it was a painful lesson. It taught me to recognize the signs of emotional manipulation and how easily it can happen without even realizing it. The first time I ever felt like I was being gaslit was when I was with her. She would say something that didn't make sense, and when I questioned it, she twisted around to make me feel like I was the one with the problem. Now, reading the guy's post, I just wanted to scream at him through the screen. I wanted to warn him so badly, tell him how it would start, how it would feel, and how he would lose himself without even knowing it. But I couldn't do it. He didn't ask for my help, and maybe he didn't even need it. I could have told him about the emotional roller coaster, the subtle ways she'd manipulate him into feeling responsible for her moods. But the reality was, I couldn't save him from his own experience. As much as I wanted to protect him, I had to accept that there are things you can't warn people about. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way, and I knew that all too well. It wasn't just that I wanted to save him, it was that part of me still couldn't fully accept how much of my own life I'd lost to that toxic relationship. It was as if I was still trapped in it somehow, despite the time that had passed. So, I decided to let it go. I told myself I had to. But, deep down, I knew I wasn't really letting it go. I was just accepting that I couldn't fix things anymore. The more I reflected on it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about her, it was about me, too. I had to face the uncomfortable truth. I'd allowed myself to stay in that relationship for far too long. I had excused her behavior, told myself it was just a phase, or that she'd change if I loved her enough. I had justified her emotional outbursts and manipulative tactics as her being misunderstood or going through a tough time. It wasn't just her manipulation that had kept me stuck. It was my own fear of being alone, of not finding anyone else who could love me the way I wanted to be loved. But the problem was, I had confused love with dependency. I had put her on a pedestal, thinking that if I could just be what she wanted, everything would be okay. But it wasn't. And in the end, it left me drained, emotionally bankrupt, and questioning my self-worth. I didn't even know who I was anymore outside of her. I had become a version of myself that was based entirely on trying to please her, trying to keep her happy, trying to avoid conflict at all costs. It was like I'd lost myself in the process. When I walked away, I had to rebuild from scratch. It wasn't just about letting go of her, it was about letting go of the version of myself I had become in that relationship. It was hard, probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But I knew it was the only way to heal. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that sometimes, in order to find yourself again, you have to lose everything. One day, after months of reflecting on everything, I had this moment of clarity. It was so simple, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been living in constant fear of making the wrong choice, afraid of hurting her, and terrified of being left. But in the process, I'd forgotten what it felt like to trust myself. I'd allowed someone else to control how I saw the world, how I saw myself. And that was when I realized just how much I had let her shape my identity. I had become so wrapped up in her needs and emotions that I forgot I was allowed to have my own. I was allowed to have boundaries. I was allowed to say no without feeling guilty. I was allowed to prioritize my own well-being. That realization, though, didn't come easily. It took a lot of pain and a lot of mistakes before I could finally understand it. I had spent so much time trying to fix things with her, trying to win her love back, that I didn't stop to think about what I needed. I had allowed her toxicity to become my reality. But now, with time, I saw that I didn't need her or anyone else to validate my existence. It wasn't easy to walk away from that relationship, but every day since has felt like a little more of me coming back. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about finding my own strength, rediscovering who I was before I lost myself in someone else's chaos. Moving on wasn't a straight line. It wasn't this clean, simple break where one day I woke up and felt better. It took time, way more time than I'd like to admit. There were days when I missed her, not because I missed her, but because I missed the illusion of what I thought we had. The promise of something better, something that would make all the pain worth it. But the problem was, I had romanticized it all. I had forgotten how she would isolate me, how she would make me feel like everything was my fault, how she would break me down emotionally, only to build me back up again when it was convenient for her. The highs felt amazing, but the lows were devastating. I also had to deal with something I hadn't fully acknowledged before: guilt. There were moments when I felt guilty for leaving, even though I knew it was the right choice. I wondered if I could have done more, been more patient, more understanding. The what-ifs ran through my mind, convincing me that I hadn't given it my all. But when I really sat with those thoughts, I realized something crucial: I had given too much. I had sacrificed pieces of myself that I would never get back. No one deserved that. But those thoughts faded with time. Slowly, I learned to forgive myself. I learned to accept that I had made the right choice, even if it wasn't easy. The hardest part was finally letting go of the guilt, and that's when I realized that sometimes, the best thing you can do for someone you love is to let them go, especially when they've been the one holding you back from being your true self. Even after everything, the echoes of the past still lingered. There were moments, often in the quiet of the night or in moments of vulnerability, when I found myself thinking about her. It wasn't a desire to go back, it was more like a lingering shadow that wouldn't quite leave. I'd wonder if she ever thought about me, or if she ever regretted the way things ended. It was strange, because logically, I knew I was better off without her. I had done the hard work of healing, of putting myself back together, and yet there was this part of me that couldn't quite let go of the emotional attachment. Maybe it was just a part of me still holding on to the hope of what could have been. Or maybe it was just the remnants of the manipulation still trying to find their way back into my head. I realized something important during these moments of reflection: the emotional scars from that relationship were deep, but they weren't permanent. The key was not letting those scars define me. In a way, they were a part of my story, but they didn't need to be the final chapter. I had the power to rewrite it, to create a new narrative for myself. But letting go wasn't just about her, it was about releasing the hold the relationship still had on me. It was about accepting that I had been manipulated, but that I didn't have to let it dictate my future. And even if it took time, I was learning how to be free of it, piece by piece. One of the hardest parts of this whole experience was the reluctant acceptance that I had been part of the problem too. I know everyone wants to blame the manipulative person in the relationship, and she definitely deserves a large chunk of the blame. But looking back, I also had to accept that I allowed it to go on for as long as it did. I didn't set boundaries. I didn't speak up when I should have. I thought I could fix things, that if I just loved her more, she'd change. That's what I told myself, and it kept me trapped for a long time. The realization that I had been complicit in my own misery hit me harder than I expected. It made me angry at myself for allowing someone to have so much control over my life, over my emotions. But anger, as I've learned, is a double-edged sword. It can either help you find your strength or keep you stuck in the past. I decided to use it to fuel my own growth, to remind myself that I was capable of more than just being someone's emotional punching bag. That didn't happen overnight, though. There were days when I felt like I was slipping back into old patterns. It was easy to forget how far I had come when I was faced with memories of how she'd make me feel like I was the one who needed to change. But I refused to let that voice in my head take over again. I was done being the person who just accepted the unacceptable. Slowly, I began to rebuild not just my self-esteem, but my sense of agency. I stopped looking for her approval, stopped seeking closure from someone who would never give it to me. And it felt good. Really good. As time passed, something strange started to happen. I began to feel an unexpected sense of relief. At first, it was subtle, like a weight slowly lifting off my chest. But then, I noticed it more and more. I was waking up feeling lighter, less burdened by the constant worry and second guessing that used to fill my days. It wasn't that I didn't still have moments of doubt or pain, those were inevitable. But I was learning how to deal with them without letting them consume me. I stopped chasing after people and things that weren't good for me. I stopped seeking validation from anyone who made me feel small or unworthy. For the first time in a long time, I was starting to feel like me again. I didn't need someone else's approval to feel okay about myself. I could walk into a room and not feel like I had to be anyone other than who I was. And then there were the small victories, the little moments where I realized how far I'd come. Like when I started saying no without guilt, when I let go of relationships that didn't bring me peace, when I stopped apologizing for my feelings. It was all these tiny steps that added up to a huge shift in my mindset. The healing wasn't linear, but it was real. The more I embraced it, the more I found myself thankful for the painful experiences that forced me to learn who I really was and who I never wanted to be again. One thing I started to realize as I healed was how much my perspective on relationships had shifted. Before, I had been so focused on what she needed, on how to keep her happy, on how to avoid conflict. I was so deep in the give mentality that I never stopped to think about what I was actually getting out of the relationship, or rather, what I wasn't getting. Now, as I moved forward, I understood that relationships are supposed to be a two-way street. They're supposed to be about mutual respect, trust, and support. I knew I wasn't ready to jump into anything serious again, but the idea of a healthy relationship no longer seemed like a fantasy. It was possible. In fact, I realized that I had to be healthy first. If I didn't know how to take care of myself, how could I expect to be a good partner to anyone else? I started to focus on rebuilding friendships and connections that weren't rooted in emotional neediness or fear. It was refreshing. It felt like I could breathe again, like I didn't have to carry the weight of someone else's emotions all the time. I started surrounding myself with people who genuinely cared about me, who supported me without trying to control me. I also learned to value my alone time, which was something I had neglected for far too long. Before, I had seen being alone as a weakness, a failure. But now, I realized it was an opportunity to reconnect with myself, to explore my own interests and passions. In a way, my past relationship had taught me what I needed to avoid in the future. It gave me a clearer picture of what real love looks like, something healthy, nurturing, and reciprocal. It also taught me that self-love isn't just a concept, it's something you have to actively practice. I wasn't perfect at it yet, but I was getting there. And that was enough. It had been months since I had walked away from that relationship, and I was starting to feel like I had found my footing again. I had been through a lot, but I was finally in a place where I could breathe without that constant weight on my shoulders. Then, one day, I ran into her. It wasn't planned. It was one of those awkward, accidental encounters. I was at a coffee shop, lost in my thoughts, when I looked up and saw her standing in line. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a rush of emotions flood my chest: anger, regret, confusion. But then something shifted. Instead of the flood of memories and emotions that usually came when I saw her, I felt nothing. At least, nothing like I expected. She glanced in my direction, and for a second, I thought she might come over and say something, like old times. But she didn't. She just looked away and went back to whatever she was doing. It was as if I was just another face in the crowd to her now. And honestly, I felt relieved. In that moment, I realized something profound. I had already let her go, in my heart, if not fully in my mind. She no longer had the power to affect me the way she used to. The person I was when I was with her no longer existed. I had moved on. It was bittersweet, because I knew that part of my life would always be a chapter one had to carry with me. But it was a chapter, not the whole book. I stood up and left the coffee shop with a sense of finality, like I had closed a door I hadn't even realized was still slightly ajar. I didn't need any closure from her. I had given myself the closure I needed. That encounter wasn't just about her, it was about me. It was about recognizing how much power I had taken back in my life by letting go of the things that no longer served me. It wasn't easy, hell, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also one of the most liberating. Letting go of her wasn't just about cutting ties, it was about letting go of the idea of who I thought I needed to be for someone else. I had spent so much of my life thinking that my worth was determined by the people around me, by how much I could give to others, by how much I could make them happy. But the truth was, my worth wasn't tied to anyone but me. I had to start rebuilding my own identity, my own sense of self-worth. And that process was more rewarding than anything I could have imagined. I had begun to see myself in a new light, not as someone defined by past mistakes or toxic relationships, but as someone who was worthy of respect, love, and care, no matter what. The real power in letting go wasn't just about moving on from a relationship. It was about reclaiming my own life, my own happiness, and my own peace of mind. It was about learning that I didn't need someone else to validate me. I was enough, just as I was. That's something I wish I could have understood years ago. But sometimes, you have to go through the pain to truly learn the lesson. Looking back now, after everything I've been through, I can honestly say that I'm grateful for the lessons I've learned. Not just from the relationship itself, but from the process of healing and finding my own strength again. I've learned that love isn't about sacrifice at the expense of yourself. It's about mutual respect, understanding, and growth. It's about being with someone who makes you feel like you're better because of them, not someone who drains you of your energy and makes you doubt your worth. It's about knowing when to stay and when to walk away. And sometimes, walking away is the most loving thing you can do for both of you. The biggest lesson I learned is that healing doesn't come from waiting for someone else to change or give you closure. It comes from within. You have to give yourself permission to heal, to move on, and to release the hold that past relationships have on you. It's about taking ownership of your story and deciding that it doesn't define you, it refines you. If you're reading this and you're in a similar situation, my advice to you is simple: trust yourself. You are worthy of love, respect, and kindness. Don't settle for a relationship that drags you down. Don't make excuses for someone's toxic behavior. And most importantly, remember that you can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself first. You deserve that. Healing takes time. It's messy, it's hard, and it's not always linear. But you're capable of it. And when you finally break free from what's been holding you back, you'll see just how much strength you've always had inside you.